I'm Leah Monroe, 29, a freelance illustrator and soon-to-be mom. The baby shower wasn't even supposed to be fancy. Just a backyard thing at my cousin's house. String lights, plastic flamingos, paper lanterns, cupcakes in pastel swirls. I was 34 weeks pregnant, belly round and tight like a swan, but I still helped carry folding chairs from the garage because no one noticed I was the guest of honor. I was standing next to the punch bowl when it happened. The patio was buzzing mimosas, laughter, clinking glasses. I heard my name once, then twice, then a sudden hush. I turned around slowly, expecting someone to wave me over. Instead, I watched my mother rise with a flute of orange hair in her hand. Her smile was too loud, her voice already thick and warm. I just want to say, she began, how proud I am of my real daughter, Claire. Her wedding last year was beautiful, her house is gorgeous, and now she's finally expecting God's timing. Right. Everyone clapped. Claire blushed and waved modestly from her seat. One hand on her perfectly flat stomach, she'd only just found out she was pregnant. 6 weeks. And Leah, Mom continued, glancing vaguely in my direction. We've come a long way with her. Life throws curveballs, doesn't it? But we learn to love through the mess, even if it started as an accident. Laughter. Real, breathy, careless laughter. I froze. No one looked at me. Even my aunt patted Mom's arm proudly, whispering something I couldn't hear. Claire caught my eye for half a second, then quickly looked away. I walked to the edge of the deck where the sunflowers leaned like tired witnesses, blinking through pollen and shame. My hands were shaking. My ankles were swollen and my throat too tight to swallow. That was my baby shower. That was my celebration. And I had just been called a mistake, in front of 30 people. A teenage niece brushed past me, then turned and whispered, "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I muttered. "Just need air." She pointed toward the mailbox near the gate. "There's something there with your name on it. Grandma made me promise to give it to you today. Said not to forget." I walked down the gravel path, gravel crunching like static beneath my sandals. The mailbox was crooked. The flag rested red. Inside a white envelope. On the front, in trembly cursive for Leah. "Open when it gets bad." Grandma had passed away 6 months ago. Breast cancer. Quiet. Private. The kind of woman who mailed letters even when she lived 10 minutes away. I slid my thumb under the seal. The card inside wasn't a card, it was a document. Thick paper. Creased at the corners. It was a will. And on the bottom, in her shaky signature, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the farmhouse, savings, and art collection, to my granddaughter, Leah Monroe, because she has always seen beauty where others saw failure. I didn't understand. I didn't know she even had an estate. Just an old house in Vermont and some paintings. Footsteps behind me. "Excuse me, are you?" "Leah." A woman in slacks and a blazer stood at the edge of the driveway. She was holding a clipboard. "I'm with Clayton and Weblaw. We've been trying to reach you. You weren't answering your phone." I blinked. "Sorry. My phone's been off all week." She smiled. "Professionally tight. Your grandmother's estate has cleared. The house and assets are yours." I brought the confirmation. "We'll need your signature." The envelope trembled in my hand. I turned toward the backyard. My mother had picked up a plate of deviled eggs and was laughing with Claire like nothing had happened. Then someone noticed the woman beside me. Whispers. Phones lifted discreetly. Someone gasped. "Is that a lawyer?" "Leah, what's going on?" And then silence. The kind of silence that spreads like spilled wine. The kind where everyone suddenly sees you, where your name, once whispered like an apology, lands like thunder. If you've ever been through something like this, been made invisible at your own event, or called a mistake in a room full of family, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel like you didn't belong. The crowd stared. I looked down at my belly. My baby kicked gently like a yes, and for the first time all afternoon, I smiled. I didn't go back to the party. I stood there, in the driveway, while the lawyer explained probate timelines and deed transfers. Her voice was calm, clipped, too professional for the way my hands kept trembling. I nodded like I understood everything. I didn't. "Would you like to come by the office this week?" she asked gently, after I'd signed 2 forms on the back of her clipboard. "Sure," I said, folding the envelope back in half. "I just didn't know. She never told me. She said you'd probably feel that way." The woman replied, "Said you were the quiet one, the one who watched everything." That made me laugh. Quiet. What an ironic word for someone who'd grown up in a family so loud they never heard a word I said. The woman left in a silver sedan. I stood by the mailbox for a few more minutes, just breathing. The light had changed softer now, almost evening. I could still hear the faint clatter of dishes from the patio. When I walked back toward the gate, people were pretending not to look. Claire was in the center, always the center, refilling her glass while Mom hovered beside her like a proud stage mother. I passed behind them and slipped inside the house. The bathroom mirror confirmed what I feared. My eyes were pink, my cheeks blotchy. I hadn't cried. Not really. But everything inside me had swollen like a bruise. In the guest bedroom, my coat was folded on the chair. My phone was inside. 8 missed calls. 3 from Mom. 1 from Claire. 1 from unknown. Then a text from Mom. That was uncalled for. "Leah, you embarrassed yourself." I stared at it for a long time, then opened the voice recorder app and pressed play. 2 hours earlier, I'd accidentally hit record when I'd stuffed my phone in my pocket during setup. I'd meant to record the laughter, the music, maybe use it later for a video project. Now I listened. Background noise, clinking, then voices. "Claire, I still can't believe she's having a baby before me. I mean, you have to admit, it's kind of sad." "Mom? Well, some girls just don't plan things the way others do. Leah's always been impulsive. She paints. She cries. She moves around too much. She was a mistake from the beginning, and she keeps proving it." The words felt like they were happening in slow motion. I stopped the recording, deleted it, then undid the deletion. Maybe I'd want proof later. Maybe I'd want to remind myself I hadn't made it up. The front door creaked open. My uncle's voice drifted in loud, joking. I heard someone say, "Guess Leah finally got her moment." Huh. I grabbed my coat, slid the document into the inside pocket. Then I walked out the back, through the side gate. No one noticed. I sat in my car for 5 minutes before turning the engine on. The interior smelled like vanilla from an old air freshener and faintly of rosemary from my grocery bag in the back. I watched the house in the mirror, saw the way the party continued without a beat. Like I had never been the center of anything at all. As I pulled out of the driveway, my phone buzzed again. A text from Claire. "Why did a lawyer show up at your baby shower? Are you suing someone?" I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. The drive home was quiet. The windows cracked to let in the summer air. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a florist shop, about 40 minutes from the suburbs where I'd grown up. The place was warm and cramped, but it had the best light. I hadn't told anyone, but I'd already set up a tiny nursery in the corner of my bedroom, mint green walls, hand-painted clouds. A second-hand crib I'd sanded down myself. I unlocked the door and kicked off my sandals, wincing as my ankles throbbed. Inside, I dropped my coat on the table and ran a hand across my belly. My little girl kicked back. "You heard that, didn't you?" I whispered. The envelope was still in my pocket. I unfolded it again, this time slower, as if rereading the words could bring Grandma closer. Because she has always seen beauty where others saw failure. I could almost hear her saying it. That low, humming voice she always used when we sat on the porch together. She was the only one who ever bought me sketch pads, the only one who framed my paintings and called them real art. I remembered once, when I was 16 and came home crying because Mom had called my oil portrait dreary. Grandma had taken the canvas, hung it above her fireplace, and said, "Then let it be dreary. That's what makes it human." I didn't know what her estate was worth. I didn't know what the farmhouse looked like anymore. It had been years since I visited Vermont. I didn't even know where to begin. But I knew what she meant. She had picked me. Not the golden daughter, not the bride, not the one with the baby registry that had minimalist neutral chic typed across the top. Me. The next day, I called the law office. "Yes. Leah Monroe," I said. "I'd like to schedule a walkthrough of the property, and I want to understand everything she left behind. Every item." The woman on the other end paused. "Of course. You sure you're up for a trip, I'm sure," I said. I hung up, then opened my sketchbook. That night, I didn't draw people. I drew a house. Old wood, tall trees, wind moving the curtains, a rocking chair on a porch. Then I drew a baby. Her eyes closed, sleeping in a cradle under a painted ceiling full of stars. And for once, it didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a beginning. The farmhouse looked almost exactly the way I remembered it, except smaller. Isn't that always the way with childhood places? It sat at the end of a winding dirt road just past a wooden sign that read, "Monroe Hill." The paint on the sign had faded to a soft gray, and ivy had started to curl along its edges, like nature was reclaiming it one leaf at a time. The lawyer had warned me over the phone that no one had stayed there in nearly a year, not since Grandma's last hospital stay. The key to my house sticky hot. I pushed open the front door slowly, half expecting her to still be there, humming from the kitchen or standing by the window brushing biscuit crumbs from her apron. But the house was silent, still, filled with the faint scent of old books and dry lavender. The living room had high ceilings, slanted wood beams, and the same rocking chair in the corner. It creaked slightly when I stepped inside, as though it was adjusting to being seen again. Her quilts were still folded neatly on the armrest, each stitch more memory than thread. The fireplace held my old portrait, the dreary one, and the sight of it made my chest tighten. She really had kept it there, all these years. I ran my fingers along the mantel, then walked to the back sunroom. That had always been her painting space, an entire wall of windows facing the trees. Cracked jars of brushes lined up on the shelves. Palettes left as though she'd just gone out to pick herbs. In the center of the room was a covered canvas. I paused, heart thudding, then reached forward and pulled the dust cloth away. It was a painting of me, not glamorous, not posed, just me sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, my face half in shadow, my eyes tired but soft. In my lap, a closed sketchbook, my hands resting gently on top of it. Grandma had painted me as I saw myself, not as others did. And under the canvas, a note. "She sees what others don't. Let her see everything." I sat down in her old stool and just breathed for a while. That was the first time I cried. Not loud sobs, just the slow, aching kind of tears that feel like remembering. Not sadness, not even grief. Just being seen, truly seen. Maybe for the first time. That night, I stayed in the house. There was no heat and the bed creaked with every movement. But I curled under the quilt and placed a hand on my stomach. "You'll come here one day," I whispered to her. "You'll know this place too." In the morning, I called the law office again. I asked about everything: accounts, debts, items to inventory. There was a savings account, modest but untouched. The art collection was being appraised. The land was fully paid off, and there were letters, dozens of them, in a cedar box at the foot of Grandma's closet. They were addressed to me. I read one each night. She wrote about things I never told her: how hard it was being the second daughter, how it felt to be praised for staying quiet, how sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness. She wrote about her own mother, who'd called her a mistake too, and how long it took her to realize she wasn't one. "You come from a long line of stubborn women," one letter said. "But you, Leah, are the first to be soft and brave. That's rarer than you know." By the third night, I stopped reading and started painting again. I hadn't painted since the second trimester. Morning sickness and stress made it impossible. But here, something in me reawakened. I dragged her easel back to the center of the sunroom, opened the old jars, and let the brushes guide me. I painted the view from her window. I painted the rocking chair with the quilt folded just so. I painted my own hands holding hers from memory. And slowly, I painted a version of myself I hadn't met yet. A mother, a woman not waiting to be invited in. I didn't tell my family I was here. Claire kept texting, "What's going on with the house? Did you really get everything? I think Mom's upset. She's been crying. You know, you should call her. Just because Grandma favored you doesn't mean you get to ghost everyone." I left them unread. It wasn't out of anger. It was self-preservation. I needed silence, and the farmhouse gave it. In the late afternoons, I took slow walks through the orchard out back. The apple trees were overgrown, the grass too high, but it felt sacred, like something asleep instead of abandoned. I imagined raising my daughter here, not full-time, maybe, but in seasons. Autumn spent jumping in leaves, spring spent lying on quilts in the sunroom, pointing to clouds shaped like castles. One evening, I heard a knock on the front door, a gentle, uncertain knock. I opened it slowly. Claire stood on the porch, holding a small white box in her hands. She looked smaller, not polished, no makeup. Her hair pulled back into a messy braid. "I shouldn't be here," she said, "but I needed to know." I stepped aside without saying a word. She walked through the house slowly, like she was afraid to touch anything. "This place is beautiful," she murmured, pausing to look at the painting in the sunroom. "She painted you." I nodded. "She never painted me. She loved you," I said, "in her own way." Claire turned toward me. "Did you know that she was leaving you everything?" "No." She held out the box. "This is for the baby." I knitted it. I blinked. "You knit." She half smiled. "I started after my miscarriage. I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. Just kept my hands moving." A silence opened between us. "She shouldn't have said what she did at the shower," Claire whispered. "Neither should Mom. I don't think I ever saw it. How much you held in." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say. After a pause, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her for a long time. "No," I said softly. "I just stopped trying to be what you needed me to be." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm not staying," she said after a while. "I just wanted to see where you belonged." She left not long after, and I stood on the porch, holding the knitted box, watching the road curve out of sight. That night, I placed the baby blanket she'd made in the crib next to my sketchbook. It was pale blue, soft, perfect. Maybe people change. Maybe they don't. But I did. The following week, I went to the local hardware store in town. It was a small place, creaky floorboards, bell over the door, a man behind the counter who looked like he'd been there since it opened. I asked for paint, wood sealant, and a proper toolkit. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and loaded everything onto the counter like he was helping someone return to a forgotten part of themselves. Back at the farmhouse, I started slow. The porch came first. The planks were weathered and soft in some spots. I sanded, scraped, repainted. The new boards didn't match the old ones, but I didn't care. I liked that it showed the patchwork what had been, what was being repaired. Every time I bent to work, my belly got in the way. I'd sit, catch my breath, and feel the little fluttering kicks like encouragement, like she was watching me build something for us. That's when the letters started coming. Not from Grandma, this time from strangers. Apparently, her estate had triggered a quiet ripple in the art world. She had submitted paintings under a pseudonym for years. Some had been sold to private collectors, others had been stored in the attic, carefully wrapped in linen, each with a note tucked in the back. For Leah, when she's ready. One gallery in Burlington reached out first. They wanted to host a retrospective. Another asked if I was continuing her work. I didn't know how to answer. I hadn't painted with purpose in years, not since art school, where my professor called my work technically proficient but lacking conviction. I dropped out 2 semesters later. Grandma never said a word, just handed me a brush one day and said, "Try again, when you're not afraid." Now, years later, I wasn't afraid. I was tired, swollen, and uncertain but not afraid. I started painting every morning before breakfast. Some days I painted the house its crooked charm, its quiet strength. Other days, I painted scenes from memory. Mom's mouth twisted in judgment, Claire's sideways glances. The echo of my teenage self sitting alone at the kitchen table while the rest of the family celebrated Claire's SAT score like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. I painted them not out of spite, but to let them go. The lawyer called again. She left a journal too, she said. It was with her personal items. "I can bring it to you or mail it." I asked her to bring it in person. When she arrived, she handed me a brown leather-bound book. It smelled like cedar and lemon balm. Inside were pages of sketches, recipes, notes about wild flowers, and observations about people she loved, and pages about me. Leah once sat on the porch for an hour, just staring at a leaf, said it looked like a sleeping dragon. That's how I knew she was different. Claire will inherit the world, but Leah will rebuild one. I closed the journal and cried for a long time. Later that week, I got a message from my mother. Not a call, just a message. "I'm confused. Hurt. I thought we were close. But now everyone's talking about you like you're some star. You were never like Claire. We didn't know what to do with you." No apology. No ownership. Just confusion and discomfort. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out to the orchard. I sat under the oldest tree and started sketching. This time, I drew my mother not as she was, but as a woman trying to love in all the wrong ways. I drew her holding a daughter she couldn't understand. I gave her soft eyes. I gave her silence. That night, the baby kicked so hard it startled me. I whispered to her, "You're coming into a strange world, little one, but I promise, you'll have a place." And I meant it. The gallery in Burlington called again. "We'd love to feature your work beside hers," the curator said. "A mother and granddaughter exhibition. Legacy through paint." The idea terrified me. Do I have to explain everything I asked? No. she said. Just show us what matters. I agreed to a small collection of private visit. I titled them after the stages of becoming visible, silence at the table, mistake, the letter, inheritance, first gift, the gallery wanted statements, but I asked them to leave the wall beside each painting blank. Let people feel it instead. As the opening approached, I debated whether to invite anyone from my family. I didn't want drama, but a part of me, the aching part, still wanted someone to see, to really see. I sent one invitation to Claire. No message. Just the flyer. The night of the opening. I wore a loose black dress and flat shoes. My ankles were swelling more by the day, but I felt calm. The gallery was warm and echoey. White walls. Soft lights. The quiet murmur of strangers staring at things they didn't yet understand. People lingered at mistake. It was the most raw, a small girl sitting on a staircase, watching the family light birthday candles for someone else. Someone whispered, "I know this feeling." That alone made it worth it. Then I saw her, Claire. She stood near the back, holding a clutch in both hands like it was armor. She didn't approach me, just walked from piece to piece, slow and deliberate, at first kick. She paused a long time, then she turned, met my eyes, and nodded once. Not an apology, not a plea, just recognition. When the night ended, I stepped out into the parking lot under the cold spring moon. I leaned against the car, breathing in the night. My phone buzzed. It was Claire. "I see you now. I'm sorry it took this long. That was enough." I went home that night and slept for 8 uninterrupted hours, something I hadn't done in weeks. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain on the window and the steady rhythm of my baby kicking like a drum. There were no congratulations, no family brunches, no glitter balloons. But there was peace. And sometimes, that's louder than applause. I went into labor on a Tuesday morning, just as the lilacs began blooming around the farmhouse. I'd been planning to give birth at the local birthing center, modern, cozy, less sterile than the hospital, but the contractions came fast and unexpected. I'd been painting the sunroom again, a final piece I wanted to finish before she arrived, when the brush slipped from my hand and the first deep ache pulled through my back. By the time I made it downstairs to grab my hospital bag, my knees buckled. The world narrowed into pulses and breath. I called the midwife. "You won't make it here," she said calmly. "You need to stay put. I'm coming to you." The wind had picked up. Rain had started again, brushing the windows in soft waves like someone whispering from the outside. I moved slowly to the living room, breathing through the pain, gripping the back of Grandma's rocking chair as another wave hit. It felt like the house was holding me, like the walls knew. The midwife arrived 40 minutes later, her assistant close behind. They came in quietly, like they belonged there. I was too far along for fear to reach me. My body had taken over, and all I could do was listen to it. Time blurred. I remember someone holding my hand, a cool rag on my forehead, someone saying, "She's almost here." And then, a scream, torn from my throat. A silence so deep it rang, and then her cry, my daughter's first sound. They placed her on my chest, slippery and warm. Her fists curled like tiny knots. I stared at her in disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed in small bird-like gasps. "I'm here," I whispered, tears slipping from my eyes onto her cheeks. We made it. She had a full head of dark hair. Her nose was small and delicate, her skin the color of raw rose petals. I named her June, not after anyone. Just the month the world always smelled most alive. They cleaned us up, checked her vitals, wrapped her in the blanket Claire had knitted. The fireplace crackled softly beside us. The sky had cleared. She slept. I didn't. I watched her for hours, memorizing every crease in her eyelids, the shape of her ears. She made small squeaky sounds in her sleep, like she was dreaming already. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. No birth announcement. No family text thread. It was just ours. For a little while. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From my mother. Dear Leah, I heard from Claire. She said you had the baby. I want to say something honest, even if I don't know how to say it right. I wasn't ready when I had you. I wasn't kind. I tried to shape you into something I could understand, and when you didn't fit, I blamed you instead of loving you. You didn't deserve that. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll let me meet her someday. Love. Mom. I folded the letter once, placed it in the kitchen drawer beside Grandma's old measuring spoons. I didn't know what I felt. Gratitude. Sadness. Some emotions don't name themselves out loud. June stirred. Her eyes opened for the first time while I was feeding her. Wide, dark, curious. I whispered, "That's your grandma's nose. The one who painted stars." In the weeks that followed, I fell into the rhythm of early motherhood. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, moments of quiet so deep they startled me. Sometimes I felt more animal than human, sometimes more spirit than flesh. Every day, I held June and told her stories. Stories about a farmhouse that had waited for us. Stories about a woman who once stitched broken things into beauty. Stories about a girl named Leah who was never quite enough until she stopped asking permission. Claire came up to visit after a month. She brought books and tea and diapers in neat cloth bundles. "She's perfect," she whispered, holding June carefully, like a new idea. We sat on the porch. The sky was pink and swollen with light. "She looks like you," Claire said, "but softer." "Good," I said. "I want her to be softer." Claire didn't bring up Mom. Neither did I. But when she left, she placed something in my hand. A pendant. Small, gold, in the shape of a crescent moon. "It was Grandma's," she said. "She gave it to me when I turned 18, said I'd know when to pass it on." I nodded, tucked it away. Not yet, but soon. The gallery in Burlington sent a letter too. They'd sold 3 of my paintings. One buyer wanted to commission a piece of the farmhouse. Another sent a note that read, "Your work feels like memory and forgiveness." I didn't know what to do with success, not the kind that came in the mail, with dollar signs and praise. So I ignored it. I painted only when June slept. I painted only what she saw, her tiny hand reaching for the sunbeam, her eyes following the flicker of candlelight. She was teaching me to see again. One afternoon, I took her outside and laid her on a quilt beneath the cherry tree. She stared up at the blossoms, pink confetti drifting down, catching in her hair. I whispered, "You were never a mistake." And in that moment, the words rang not just for her. They rang backward through the years, through the silences, through every half-hearted hug and backhanded compliment I'd grown up swallowing. You were never a mistake. Not when I drew leaves instead of math problems. Not when I dropped out of college to paint. Not when I chose to have her, even without a partner. Even with nothing certain but my hands. The farmhouse had grown quieter in spring, or maybe I had. The birds sounded closer, the wind slower. Everything felt earned. That night, I took down the last canvas I'd painted, the one from the sunroom. It was of June, cradled in my arms, but the face of the mother was unfinished. I dipped my brush in soft gray, then ochre, then white, and I painted myself. Not as I was, but as she saw me, whole. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. June had just fallen asleep against my chest, her tiny breath tickling my collarbone, Her fingers curled around the edge of my shirt. The house was warm, lamplight low, the wood floors humming with their usual creaks. I was sitting in Grandma's old rocking chair, the rhythm slow and steady, when I heard it. One soft knock, then another, then silence. I froze. It had been weeks since I'd seen anyone besides Claire. The gallery had mailed another check. A few friends from art school had messaged after the exhibit. But the farmhouse stayed quiet, purposefully so. I rose slowly, cradling June, her head nestled in the crook of my neck. When I opened the door, a gust of wind moved through the hallway like a memory. My mother stood on the porch. Her hair had gone grayer than I remembered. Her eyes looked tired. She was holding a casserole dish covered in foil classic Mom. Her version of apology had always been baked. "I didn't call," she said softly. "I figured you wouldn't answer." I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, cautiously, like someone afraid to leave footprints. She set the dish on the kitchen counter and stared at the painting above the fireplace, the one of me, the dreary one. "You kept it up," she said. "She did," I corrected. "She always liked you more." Her voice wasn't bitter, just resigned. She knew how to love you. I didn't. I watched her as she crossed into the living room, pausing to take everything in the baby toys scattered on the rug, the stack of art books on the table, the bouquet of wildflowers wilting in a glass jar. "Can I sit?" I nodded. She lowered herself onto the couch and folded her hands in her lap. The silence between us stretched like an unspoken rope. I didn't hand her June. Not yet. "She's beautiful," Mom said, eyes lingering on her cheeks, the little pink cap pulled over her dark hair. "She looks like you," I said nothing. I used to think having children meant molding. You know, shaping them into people who wouldn't make the same mistakes you did. I thought love might fix it. She didn't need fixing, I said quietly, rocking June gently as she shifted. "No," she whispered. "Neither did you." The words landed like stones in water ripples, long, deep, and slow. "I was scared," she continued. "When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was 23. Your father had just left. Claire was already 2. I had no job, no family willing to help. And then there you were, this quiet, wide-eyed baby who didn't cry much, didn't smile much, just watched." She looked at me then. Really looked. I didn't know what to do with a child like that. Claire was loud, demanding, easy to understand. You were gentle, and I mistook that for weakness. I didn't respond. My throat felt full. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear me say it." I sat down across from her, June still sleeping in my arms. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said. "But that doesn't mean I trust you." She nodded slowly, like she had expected that. "I'm not here to fix anything," she said. "I'm just here. If you'll let me be." We sat in silence. June stirred and let out a tiny squeak, her hand twitching open. I looked down at her, then back at my mother. "She cries when she's overwhelmed," I said, "but she quiets fast. She listens. She gets that from you." I rose, gently placing June in the bassinet beside the fireplace. She shifted but didn't wake. The warmth of the room cradled her now. Mom followed me into the kitchen. I removed the foil from the casserole dish. It was her signature baked macaroni with caramelized onions and breadcrumbs. She'd made it every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. "I haven't had this in years," I murmured. "I remembered you liked it extra crispy on top." We stood there in the glow of the kitchen light, the quiet hum of the fridge between us. I took a fork from the drawer, tried a bite. It tasted like childhood sharp cheddar. Too much garlic. the crunch of baked edges that always burned my tongue when I was a kid because I couldn't wait for it to cool. "It's good," I said softly. She smiled. I poured us both tea chamomile for me, peppermint for her, just like Grandma used to. We moved back to the living room, June still breathing gently in the bassinet, one hand splayed open like she was dreaming of flying. "She left me a letter too," Mom said suddenly. I looked up. "Grandma, a letter came 2 weeks after the will was read. It was short, just one sentence. 'You did what you could. Now let her do what she must.'" I let the words settle. "She knew," I whispered. "All of it. She always did." Mom replied, "I hated that about her. Sometimes." We sat for another hour, trading pieces of silence and old memories. Eventually, Mom stood. "I should go. It's a long drive back." I walked her to the door. She paused on the porch, the night air sharp but clean. "Can I come again?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Not for me," I said, "but for her." A soft smile spread across her face. "That's fair." She left without asking for a hug, and I watched her taillights disappear down the gravel path, swallowed by trees. Inside, June stirred. I scooped her up and held her close. "You have 2 grandmothers," I whispered. "One is in the stars, the other is trying." She blinked, then yawned a small, soft opening of the mouth that looked exactly like mine. Later that night, I took out my paints. The canvas waited in the sunroom. I started a new piece, June in my mother's arms, both of them surrounded by lilacs. My mother's face not softened, but real, weathered, unsure, and open. The colors came easier this time. I didn't hesitate with the shadows. I titled it, "Almost Too Late," and I hung it beside the fireplace. For once, it didn't feel like history. It felt like a beginning we earned. The first time I took June into town, I carried her in a fabric sling across my chest. Her face turned inward, asleep beneath the soft folds of a blanket my grandmother had knitted long before either of us knew she'd need it again. The town hadn't changed much, still sleepy, still humming with the same understated rhythm. The cafe on Main still had its chalkboard sign with a misspelled pastry special, and the bookstore 2 doors down had a crooked stack of gardening guides in the window like it was stuck in last spring. But walking through it with her made everything feel new. People noticed me differently now. They smiled, not out of recognition but out of warmth. Not because of who I was in the Monroe family, but because of what I was becoming on my own. June shifted, opened her eyes briefly, then closed them again as I stepped into the cafe. The bell jingled overhead. The smell of cardamom, espresso, and fresh bread hit me all at once. Behind the counter was a man in his 40s with graying temples and kind eyes. He looked up from the espresso machine and smiled. "First timer?" he asked, nodding toward June. I smiled back. "Yeah, her first trip into the world." He handed me a menu. "No rush. We've got all day for brave women and sleepy babies." The words landed somewhere deep inside me. Brave women. Not tired women. Not figuring it out women. Just brave. I don't think anyone had ever called me that before without expecting something in return. I ordered a tea and a slice of lemon poppy seed cake, sat by the window, and watched June's face while she slept. Her nose twitched slightly with each breath. Her tiny hands rested on the edge of the sling, soft and open, unguarded. The gallery had emailed me the week before, asking if I was interested in another show. "We'd love to explore a mother-child theme," the curator had written. "There's something profound about your recent work. It speaks of healing through creation." I hadn't answered. Not yet. I was still learning how to exist in this new shape, part woman, part shelter, part memory, but I had started sketching again. Little things. June's mouth when she yawns, The way the afternoon light falls across the crib, the curve of her back when she stretches in her sleep. I wasn't sketching for galleries or shows. I was sketching for proof that this happened, that I was here, that she was real. After the cafe, I stopped by the post office. Inside my box was a single envelope, pale blue, addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from my father. I hadn't thought of him in months. He'd left when I was 5. Sporadic contact after that. A postcard on my 16th birthday. A missed call when I graduated high school. Once, when I was 21, he showed up to a gallery opening in the city. Drunk. Called me kid and said he liked the sad trees. That was the last time we spoke. I sat on the bench outside and opened the letter. Leah. Claire called me. Said you had a baby? A daughter. I don't know what to say. I wasn't there for you. I won't pretend I have a right to be now, but I saw something in the news. Your name? Your art? You look like your mother? But you paint like someone trying to unbury the world. I don't expect a response. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Dad. I stared at the paper. My name, written in his hand, the word proud sitting there like a stone in my lap. I didn't know how to feel, but I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I folded it and tucked it into June's baby book between a photo of her first smile and a lock of her hair. Not because he earned that space, but because I wanted her to know that even broken things can leave behind something soft. That night, after June fell asleep, I lit a candle in the sunroom. I pulled out a blank canvas and placed it beside me, but I didn't start painting. Not yet. Instead, I opened Grandma's journal again. In the back pages, there was a list, a quiet one, no dates, no explanations. Just a heading: things Leah will learn to do on her own. Grow basil in a teacup. Fix a screen door. Say no without flinching. Rest without guilt. Paint without asking if it's good. Leave a room without shrinking. Make a home that doesn't hurt. Let the past speak, but not decide. The list ended there. I pressed my hand to the page. I hadn't realized how many of those I was already doing. The next morning, I bundled June in a soft yellow sweater and took her out to the garden. I planted basil in an old ceramic mug. It wasn't perfect, dirt clung to my sleeves, and June fussed halfway through, but when it was done, I placed it on the windowsill, right above the sink, where Grandma's ceramic rooster used to stand. Each day, I watered it while holding her in one arm. Each day, it grew. The letter from the gallery stayed unopened on my desk for another week. I kept thinking about that word healing, as if it were a neat thing, like a wound that closes clean. But healing was messier than that. It was holding your baby while washing dishes at 2 a.m. It was answering your mother's hesitant phone calls with nothing but silence between the lines. It was remembering you used to cry after family dinners, not because anyone hit you, but because no one saw you. Healing wasn't always visible, but I could feel it in the floorboards when I walked barefoot across the farmhouse at dawn. I could feel it in the way June gripped my finger with surprising strength, as if anchoring me. I could feel it in the fact that I no longer had to tell anyone I was enough. I just was. One evening, I took the painting I started in silence and finally picked up the brush. It wasn't a portrait. It wasn't even of June. It was the porch steps. Empty. Just the light spilling across them and one leaf resting on the edge. I titled it Arrival, not because someone had come, but because I had. June was 3 months old when I finally opened the gallery's envelope. It was a formal invitation, thick cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing you'd expect for a wedding or a museum gala. They were calling the exhibit Inheritance: The Blood We Choose. The title made my chest tighten. Inside, a note from the curator, Leah. Your recent work carries something rare, a kind of personal truth that quietly shakes the viewer. We'd be honored to debut your next series as the closing gallery of our fall season. No theme restrictions. Just bring what you've been holding. I sat with the invitation for days, letting it rest on the windowsill beside the basil pot. The plant had sprouted a new leaf. June liked to bat at it when I held her at the sink, her small fists opening and closing like she was trying to feel what made it grow. I hadn't decided whether I would exhibit again, not because I didn't want to, but because something in me was shifting. My art was no longer about proving I belonged. It was about mapping where I had been, and for once, I wasn't painting from absence. I was painting from presence of my daughter, this house, the quiet. The only thing missing was Grandma. One morning, I packed June into the car and drove up the winding road to the old cemetery just outside town. The grave was simple white stone, her name etched in blocky lettering. A sprig of dried lavender laid neatly at its base. I sat cross-legged in front of it. June nestled in my lap. The wind carried a faint scent of pine. A robin chirped from the next row over. "I wish you could see her," I whispered. "She would have loved your kitchen and your paints. She looks at everything like it's a secret." I pulled a folded paper from my coat pocket. A sketch, one I'd done the night before, June asleep on my chest. Her fingers tangled in the hem of my shirt. I left it beneath the stone. A thank you. A continuation. The drive home was quiet. June slept most of the way, her breaths deep and steady. The leaves were beginning to change early splashes of orange and gold on the tips of the trees. The world was turning, slowly but surely, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to turn with it. When I got back, I opened the storage room off the side hallway. It was one of the last untouched spaces in the farmhouse. Dust layered the shelves, boxes stacked high, a few old frames leaning against the wall. I cleared a space and set up a new canvas. This time, I didn't plan. I just painted. I painted the window in June's nursery, with the morning light breaking through the lace curtains. I painted the uneven floorboards in the hallway where my footsteps creaked just enough to calm her at night. I painted the shadow of my grandmother's rocking chair stretching across the porch as dusk fell. And then I painted my mother. Not the woman who had dismissed me at my baby shower, not the sharp tongue, not the control. I painted the version of her I saw in the kitchen weeks ago, quiet, older, her eyes tired but no longer defensive. She was holding June in the painting, but not tightly. Just enough. Her hands open, palms up. I titled it Space Between Generations. And that's when I knew I would do the gallery. Not for recognition, not for the buyers or the critics, but for me, for her, for all the women in my line who were either invisible or too loud to be heard, for those of us caught in the middle, whispering truths into the cracks of the floorboards. I emailed the curator that night. I'm in. A week later, I packed 5 finished canvases into the back of my car and drove them to Burlington. Claire met me outside the gallery. She insisted on helping. She had changed. Subtly. She didn't wear full makeup anymore. Her clothes were simpler, softer. She greeted June first, holding her close with a kind of reverence I hadn't expected. "I booked a hotel near here," she said, "so I can help you during the opening. You don't have to. I want to," she said, firmly. As we unpacked the paintings, she paused in front of one mistake, the same one from the first exhibit. "I still think about what Mom said," she murmured. "I know," I replied. "She didn't mean it, but she said it." Claire nodded. "She's trying now, but sometimes I wonder if we're all just born into a script we never agreed to." I looked at her, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years, not the rival, not the polished daughter, not the comparison. I saw a sister. Tired. Trying. Still learning. We can write a new one, I said. She smiled. That night, I stayed in a small Airbnb just outside the city. June slept in her travel crib near the window. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of cars on wet pavement. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. At the gallery opening, the room was full, not crowded, but full of people who leaned in when they looked, who whispered softly to one another, who gave the workspace. I didn't announce myself. I just watched. People lingered at arrival, stood quiet in front of space between generations, tilted their heads at inheritance birch and bone. And then I saw her, my mother. She walked in slowly, alone, dressed in navy blue, not showy, not rehearsed. She found Claire first. Then she saw June in my arms. She didn't say anything. She just reached out, and I let her hold her. June didn't cry. She stared at my mother's face, wide-eyed, then smiled a gummy, open-mouthed grin that stunned us all. Tears filled Mom's eyes. "I think she forgives us already," she whispered. I nodded. Let's not waste it. We stood there, the three of us. And for once, no one filled the silence. There was nothing to defend, nothing to prove, just presence. Later that night, I returned home to the farmhouse. I carried June inside, kissed her forehead, and placed her gently in the crib beneath the painting of stars. I made tea, sat on the porch, let the wind move through my hair, and I realized this wasn't the ending I expected, but maybe it was the one I needed. A story not of revenge or regret, but of reclamation. I woke to the sound of birdsong and a quiet cooing from the next room. June was already awake, staring up at the painted stars on her ceiling as if memorizing each one. I shuffled in with bare feet and tousled hair, and as I leaned over the crib, she looked at me and grinned wide, open, toothless. It struck me how little it takes to make her happy. My face, my voice, just being there. I lifted her into my arms and pressed my lips to her forehead. "Good morning, Moonbeam," I whispered, a name that had somehow stuck since the first week she came home. She blinked, then nestled into my shoulder. I could feel her breath warming my collarbone. It had been 6 months since the baby shower. 6 months since I was called a mistake in front of a garden full of faces who hadn't really seen me. 6 months since I opened an envelope that changed everything. In those months, I'd learned how to carry June while stirring oatmeal with one hand. I'd learned that I could nap for 20 minutes and still function like I'd slept all night. I'd learned that silence in a room, real silence, can be the safest sound in the world, especially when the silence is shared between two people who have no expectations of each other. We had created a rhythm, June and I, a quiet duet. We read books in the afternoon sun, her fingers always grabbing at the pages like she wanted to rewrite them. I sang while I painted songs from childhood, songs I made up, at night. I told her stories that weren't in any book stories of grandma, of basil growing in teacups, of girls who learned to breathe underwater. She had no idea that her life had already rearranged so many others, but I could feel it ripples moving outward. One morning, I opened the mailbox to find a postcard. It was from my father again, a photograph of the ocean, on the back. Still proud, still hoping. One day, no return address. I tucked it behind the baby monitor, not close enough to invite anything more, not far enough to forget. Claire visited often now. She'd bring muffins, baby socks, small books with textured pages. Sometimes she'd stay for hours. We'd sit on the porch and talk about things we were never allowed to say when we were younger. "Do you think we'll be better mothers?" she asked once. "I don't think we'll be perfect," I replied, But I think we'll see them. That was the word that always returned, see. To be seen without being corrected. To be witnessed and still loved. Mom called every few days. Her voice had softened, less clipped, more tentative. She never asked for praise. She just asked how June was doing. Sometimes she sent old family recipes in the mail, scribbled in her neat cursive with small notes in the margins. Add more lemon than you think. Or Grandma used to hide a cinnamon stick in this. We were rebuilding. One postcard of tenderness at a time. I knew she still wrestled with guilt, but I never brought it up. Some grief needs to be lived in silence, not explained. One Sunday, she came to visit. She arrived with a basket of herbs and a photo album I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. We sat on the floor of the living room, June gurgling on a quilt between us, and flipped through pages of birthdays, summer swims, Christmas mornings where I had always been slightly out of frame. She stopped on a photo of me at age 10 standing in the corner of the kitchen, sketching something, unaware that anyone was watching. I never noticed this one, she whispered. I was probably focused on Claire's science trophy on the next page. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. But I reached over and pointed to my sketch. I was drawing a bird with a broken wing. It stayed on the windowsill for 3 days. She looked at me, eyes shining. I wish I asked. I nodded. Me too. You're asking me. Later, after she left, I fed June in the rocker by the fireplace. The light slanted through the windows just right, making dust look like snow. I realized how many rooms in the house still smelled faintly of lavender, how Grandma was still here, in tiny ways. I opened her journal again. There were only a few pages left, many of them blank, but near the back was a note I hadn't seen before. Folded and tucked into the spine, it was addressed to future Leah. By now, you've carried something through that no one could carry for you. If you're reading this, it means you did not break, even if you bent. Your mother loved you the only way she knew how, but it wasn't enough. And it's okay to say that. Let June love without fear. Let her fall without shame. Let her become someone you don't fully recognize. That will mean you've done well. I closed the journal and sat still for a long time. I didn't cry. I just felt full. That evening, I took down one of my first painting's mistake, the one that had started it all. I turned it around and wrote on the back, "Not anymore." Then I wrapped it gently in linen and stored it in the attic, not to hide it, not to erase it, but because I no longer needed it in the room. That night, I painted something new. June asleep on the porch, sunlight in her eyelashes, a basil pot beside her, overgrown and wild. No background, just her, just growth. I titled it, "Every Beginning I Never Had." In the morning, I carried her down to the orchard, now freshly trimmed and breathing again after the summer heat. We sat under the same tree where I had once told her she was not a mistake. She looked up at the sky and laughed, like she understood. I laid back on the quilt, held her up, and whispered, "One day, you'll have questions, and I'll tell you everything. But for now, you just get to be loved." And she was. We both were. Autumn folded itself into the valley like a breath held and released. The trees went golden, then rust red. The farmhouse creaked in familiar ways, the wind taking liberties through cracks in the window frames. And I found myself waking up each morning before the baby, just to sit at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a warm mug and let the quiet hold me. June was now nearly crawling, wiggling in determined diagonals across the quilt, knocking over baskets, chewing the corners of board books. She had 2 bottom teeth, eyes that tracked every movement, and a laugh that erupted out of nowhere like sunlight between clouds. There was no noise from the family group chat anymore. I wasn't sure if I'd been removed or if it had gone silent. Either way, I didn't check. Mom texted now and then, mostly photos of her garden, a soup recipe, or a new piece of pottery she'd taken up throwing. Claire sent videos of her own baby bump growing, her hands always placed protectively on top. I responded when I wanted to. I didn't, when I didn't. And I finally stopped apologizing for the difference. One evening, I walked through the attic with June strapped to my chest, flashlight in hand, letting her look at the shadows stretch over boxes. We found a small, hand-painted tin box in the corner, forgotten, sealed tight. Inside were old negatives and a few grainy Prince photos of Grandma as a teenager, standing barefoot in a field with a sketchbook in hand, eyes squinting into the sun. There were postcards from cities I'd never known she visited: Prague, Amsterdam, Kyoto, places she never spoke of but clearly carried. Underneath it all was a folded paper, faded ink. It was a newspaper clipping. Local girl wins art fellowship, plans to travel to Paris. Date 1954. I read the article twice. She had been accepted into an international program but turned it down. No explanation. Just a line in the interview. Sometimes roots are more important than wings. I thought about what it meant to stay, and what it meant to leave. The next morning, I called the gallery. I want to pull out of the next show. I said, without anxiety, I want to take a break. The woman on the other end paused. Are you sure we were excited? I'm sure, I said. There's something else I need to paint first, but it's just for me. I hung up and stood at the window while June played on the floor, outside. The wind shook the apple tree gently. 2 leaves broke off and swirled toward the ground like dancers. I opened a fresh canvas in the sunroom. This one would stay in the house. I didn't know what it would be yet. I just knew it would begin with light. That afternoon, I received a package in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. My father. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted, varnished smooth, the hinges stiff from disuse. Inside the box, a set of worn oil paints, arranged in no particular order. Most of the labels faded. Underneath, a note. They were mine. Before I left. Before I got lost. Maybe she'll use them one day. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't beg for a future. It just left a piece of the past. And maybe that was enough. I placed the box on a shelf in June's room. One day she'd ask about all of this. And when she did, I'd tell her everything. I'd tell her I was called a mistake in the middle of a celebration meant for me. I'd tell her I left without goodbye and opened an envelope that made everyone else fall quiet. I'd tell her that silence can hurt, but it can also heal, when you fill it with the right kind of living. I'd tell her about Grandma's farmhouse, how it waited for me, how it held me when nothing else could. I'd tell her about the portraits I painted, how they weren't about being seen, but about learning to see. And I'd tell her about a baby named June, born on a stormy morning in a house full of ghosts and roots and golden light. I wouldn't edit the hard parts. I wouldn't lie to make people look better than they were. But I'd remind her of something important, something I didn't know until I was nearly 30. You are not what others fail to recognize in you. You are not their inability to love you properly. You are not their silence, their shame, their shadows. You are what you plant, what you name, what you carry forward, and you are never, never a mistake. That evening, I bundled June in her blanket and stepped out onto the porch. The stars were beginning to bloom above the trees. I rocked her gently in Grandma's chair and whispered old stories to her in a new voice. One day, she'll have her own stories, and I'll be just a figure in the background, a hand on her shoulder, a voice in a journal, a sketch in a frame. That's all I ever wanted to be. Not the star, just the light that let someone else grow.